everyone, I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie, and together we are ThinkerThemer, and we review games from two different perspectives. I'm all about the mechanics and Maggie is all about the theme, and today we are reviewing a very large game called Dwellings of Eldervale. This game was published by Breaking Games and is designed by Luke Laurie. This is the Legendary Edition from the original Kickstarter, so just be mindful that some of the components may be a little bit different to that of the retail edition, but the gameplay stays the same. So let's get stuck into our review.
All right, so in Dwellings of Eldervale, we are going to be playing as the leader of one of 16 different possible asymmetric factions. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be summoning our dragons, our warriors, our wizards, workers, and sending them out onto the land of Eldervale to explore all sorts of different areas, find treasures, go on adventures, potentially fight off a couple of monsters, and then, ultimately, as you want to do, you just want to settle down. So you want to make sure that you build a house and kind of call it a day, so you can kind of sit back with a cup of tea and reminisce about all the great things that you did in your time.
Now, at the core of what you're doing in this game is worker placement, and you start the game with 3 basic workers in this game. These workers are going to be placed out into this pattern of hex tiles that is set up according to the number of players in the game. And for the most part, when you're placing your workers out into this world of Eldervale, you are trying to collect treasures or resources. Now, these resources are important for 2 different reasons in this game, and these 2 reasons are very much going to dictate your victory points at the end of the game. One is that you need resources in order to draft these adventure cards. Adventure cards are cards that can be purchased for the cost shown and then added to your tableau, which give you a unique worker placement spot to generate things like more resources or powerful actions that help you along the way. But also they're going to score for you at the end of the game, which I'll come back to in a moment. The second thing that you need resources for in this game is to build dwellings. It's in the name of the game, Dwellings of Eldervale. What you're going to be trying to do in this game is convert your 6 regular workers into dwellings. And we do that by taking one of these very cute rooftops and placing it on a meeple or your worker's head, and then eventually building out the world of Eldervale by placing your dwellings out into these different elemental realms. When you convert your worker, it's going to generate some instant victory points depending on what's adjacent to it, but it's also going to score you some points at the end of the game. So let's come back to the main way that you score points in this game. And for that, I want to draw your attention to the scoring board. This scoring board depicts 8 different elements on this star here. In every game, there will only be a number of active elements according to the number of players plus 2. So in a 2-player game, there are 4 active elements, which you can see here with the orbs positioned at the top of each of these tracks. Why these are really important is because throughout the game, you're going to have opportunities to move up these tracks, and these tracks are going to be the multipliers. They're going to be the multipliers for the types of elements where you've built dwellings and the types of cards that you've recruited into your tableau. Now, like any good worker placement game, everybody's fighting over the same things. So, of course, you want to be the first to purchase those cards when you're able to. But another element is that only one person can dwell on each of these tiles. So another big part of this game is the discovery or exploring action, where you're going to go to the dungeon and have the ability of drawing a new tile and placing that out into the world of Eldervale, which generates some new resources for everybody to go and capture. But also it opens up another spot for a new dwelling. And the race element is important in this game because the types of elements that you're building on here, the types of cards that you're drafting or buying from the adventure cards, they are going to influence your position on this track. They're going to help you move up on it, which ultimately creates this higher multiplier. But because the treasure and the spaces for dwellings are all limited in this game, you know what that means? People are going to try to fight you. So the way that this works in this game is that someone moves into your hex space and they start or trigger a battle. And the way that plays out is that you're going to be trying to have as many dice available to you in that battle, because the person with the highest dice roll will win. So if I get a 6 and then a 5 strong, and Maggie gets a 6 but then a 4 is her next die, then I would win that battle. pretty straightforward, but it's by no means a straight dice roll that can't be mitigated against. The way that you can add to the battle is you can recruit people on surrounding tiles of your faction to come in and help you to add dice. You can use swords that you've been collecting along the way to add a dice to the battle as well. And any dwellings that you've built that are surrounding the battle are also going to contribute dice. And then you both roll the number of dice that you've collected, and the person with the highest roll will win. The other person gets sent to the underworld, but don't worry, because there is a consolation prize. You'll get a sword for being sent to the underworld to help you in your next battle. Now you can see the minis standing around the board, and I haven't even referred to them, but a battle with a monster occurs in exactly the same way. If you move into an adjacent hex tile surrounding a monster, they are going to want to move into your territory and fight you. And dramatically with these bases, the monster will move into your area, and then the same fight will play out. But all monsters have some kind of unique ability that can impact on that battle, and they have a set number of dice that they will roll against yours. So you can mitigate your rolls in exactly the same way. Now, one final element about the worker placement part is that I mentioned that you start with 3 basic workers, but in this game, you have the ability to recruit 3 new units that act in different ways. You have a dragon, which is going to be more powerful in a fight because instantly they have 3 dice for every fight. You have a teleport wizard, and this wizard can just pop up wherever they like on the map, acting as a worker that doesn't need to follow the rules of adjacency. And then you've got a warrior, and when the warrior goes out into the board, they're more powerful in battles. But there's a little rule that's really interesting in this game, that when you first place a worker out onto the board after recalling them all back, that worker can't be in the same spot as someone else unless it's a warrior, and a warrior is always ready for a fight.
Hot-headed.
Summoning new workers costs a lot of resources in this game, and also dwelling costs resources in this game, but they also have to be triggered by an action, and some of those actions are shown on the board itself. So you can place a worker out in order to summon a new character, a new worker, or to dwell. But what's really interesting about this game is when you recall your workers, so if all of my workers were out on the board, as I recall them, I get to do a worker placement action in my tableau area that either triggers me to do an action like summon or dwell, or gather resources either on my original home card or on an adventure card that I've built into my tableau. Now, one final little thing is that you start the game with a number of these magic cards. These magic cards allow you to do things like cast spells, have prophecies, go on quests, or mechanically, they give you end game scoring conditions, and they give you one-off benefits that might help you recruit a worker for free, for example, or maybe help you win a battle that you otherwise wouldn't have won. You can also get more of these cards along the way, but in terms of an overall explanation of the game, there's a lot more nuance than what I've taught through here, but we'll try and touch on some of these things in our review. So, what do you think of the game?
All right, so the first thing I have to say is this was probably the game that mismatched my expectations to reality probably the most, because from always looking at the box, I was like, oh, this looks like it's going to be a very fantasy heavy, I imagine, like dungeon crawler almost, definitely like people on the map kind of thing. And those things are true, they're there, but it's actually really just like a really fun worker placement with resource management, end game goals, and like it's all the like recruiting more workers, all the stuff that I know and love of days of old.
It's a reskinned farming game.
Yeah, it really is. The other amazing thing about this is the actual, like, just the production value of this. Aesthetically, the table presence of this is great. I love the color scheme that they've gone with. I love all of the actual artwork in the cards and even on the tiles. I absolutely am obsessed with these trays.
The trays are incredible. And yes, there are all these components, these really deluxe things that came with the Legendary Edition that we're very lucky to have our hands on. That add things like these ridiculous noise, sound effects, basses that the monsters don't even move that frequently, but having that sound, really, you can feel the monster arriving, and that's super exciting. I love that in the game. But the trays are the most practical element. I love that each of the factions have their abilities clearly written on these boards, but also that practically this board that explains and kind of gives a bit of like illustration to who you are sits really nicely on top of this player tray. It just clicks into place and holds everything together and ready to go for your next game. I've seen this game actually played at a lot of game days, and it always catches my eye. Before we even had tried it or knew what it was about, I was always like, what is that game? Because you see the miniatures, but I'm so surprised for such a sprawling, big table presence game, just how quick and easy it is to set up and get going. They've just really been thoughtful about the decisions that they've made for each of the components. Really top quality stuff.
Yeah, I also really love the actual individual, the wooden components. And I know that there are cardboard component versions, and then there's also wooden components. And these wooden components with is that, what do you call that?
Screen printing.
Screen printing. That is they're just so gorgeous. And for something that can be a little bit fiddly, of like, okay, I get this resource and I put that back. I just love that so much, because every time I touch one of those, I have to grab one of those. I'm like, oh, there's that aesthetic satisfaction immediately.
Yeah, it is beautiful. And if you can get your hands on it, the deluxe edition or the legendary edition, obviously more things are upgraded. The only one thing I wish is that, in the legendary edition, it didn't come with everything from all of the other editions, because you do end up with a lot of replication, a little bit of wastage. But ultimately, I really feel like this is best in class level production quality. Really, really cool. Yeah. Now let's circle back to what Maggie said at the beginning, which was that this is a game we didn't expect to like, and I 100% agree. I looked at it, I saw the mini, saw the fantasy theme, and kind of had discounted this game. But once you play it, it really feels like a classic worker placement game. If you enjoy worker placement style games and maybe not fantasy, I think there's enough here to kind of not be taken so much into the realm of fantasy so much. I really felt like there was palpable tension in the worker placement game as well. It wasn't just worker placement for the sake of worker placement, but it all integrates together into this interesting race, this highly competitive race. And you know how competitive Maggie and I are. But the fact that everything is kind of open and available to all players, and that you can attack each other if you so desire to really try and slow someone down or stop them. Because one thing I didn't mention in the overview is that this game ends when someone builds 6 or basically converts all of their workers into dwellings, or the last tile is added to the world of Eldervale. Both of those things will trigger the game end. And so sometimes you want to slow someone down, or sometimes you just have the right resources to build a dwelling somewhere and you don't want someone else to take it. And so that might force you to go into a battle. Or maybe there's a card that you want to purchase, and there's an action in this game that actually burns cards as well. So you can frustrate other people's plans, and that feeling of finiteness around the finiteness of the treasures and the spots for dwellings, like, really creates this tense experience, much like a lot of the different Euros that we love so much.
Yeah, I love that there's always a balance in terms of what you're doing. So with those workers, it's like if you start making dwellings too early before you've actually been able to collect enough resources to summon your other units, like your dragon or your warrior, then you're going to feel very stuck, because then you might have, I got a couple of early dwellings, and now I only have the one worker trying to do all the heavy lifting.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's the choices. It's the choices of how are you using the limited treasures that you have available to you. Do you recruit more of summon more of your team so that you've got more workers to get more resources? Or do you go after the cards before other people do? Or do you just focus on dwelling and doing that and optimizing that as much as possible, but then later finding that you're a little bit left behind because you haven't summoned enough people? And so it just feels like this puzzle in your mind of
Yeah.
like, what is the best order
Yeah.
to do these things
And
in?
even like which elements to focus on, and then should I just focus on this one or two elements to make sure that I can get those influence trackers all the way to the top, get those orbs. We haven't really talked about the orbs. The orbs are quite cool because they're like a super extra special resource that then means that you can get some really good benefits or make some of those adventure cards really, really powerful, the ones that require it. So even that, like when it's this beautiful thing of having these resources and going, oh, what do I want to do? Do I want to go on, the adventures, the build or summon, and then knowing, well, and if I'm doing that, do I focus on this element? What about that element? And sometimes the element that you want to focus on, there aren't any tiles of that color, or the card, the adventure card of that element, you can't afford it yet. And so you're always constantly feeling like, oh, I'm only just, this far away,
Yeah.
or only one little turn away, or one resource away. And so that's a really interesting, fun tension to have.
And the tension is then overlaid with the puzzle because there are ways that your workers can move or not move, and the fact that sometimes they need to be adjacent to your other workers, that creates this spatial puzzle as well about like, well, how am I going to get over there? And then just when you think you've got that figured out, the unknownness around the monsters is quite interesting. The monsters are actually not a huge component to this game, but what they do add is a bit of a what would you say?
Disruption, I guess?
Yeah, they
like,
disrupt
they just shake things up a little bit, really, in different areas.
They create a bit of an inconvenience because when you want to go on a tile that's next to a monster, you know that means that you're going to go into battle with that monster.
They're going to rush into where you are.
Yes, and that means that your worker might actually end up being removed from the board, and you need to have the worker in the spot where you want to create a dwelling.
Yeah.
And so you can see how very quickly that turns you off going on that onto that tile in the first place. The other thing is that those monsters eventually will keep following people and will make their way across the board. So a tile that was freely available at one point in the game is now much more difficult to achieve because the monsters just moved into that area. The other cool thing is that when you actually manage to defeat the monster, they give you a benefit of moving up one of these elements or gaining glory on this glory track, which is a track that you get to move up anytime you fight one of your opponents or a monster. If you win, you get to access these bonuses, which means that it can be a viable strategy to go battle strong in this game. Maggie and I don't play a lot of battling games, and I think when we play this game, we're a little low on the conflict side of
very
things.
low
Like
on the conflict,
low on, we try to work around and not battle as much as possible. But when we've played with other players with this game who love that style of game, of course they're looking for ways to leverage that glory track to as quickly as possible get their warrior available to them or their dragon to be able to go after those monsters and get the benefits of defeating them. So you can play the game in two very different modes. Even in the same game, people are doing very different things.
And even with that, like this is one of those games that I love because every single time that you go into it, you can kind of go, oh, okay, am I going to try and go dwelling strong early on, or no, actually I'm going to try and go for those adventure cards and really make the most out of them. I also appreciate that the adventure cards, it's not the kind of card game or tableau building where there's a lot of stuff to read and a lot of really convoluted, oh, that's right, I'm able to do this or I'm able to do that. There's some of those abilities that you're able to pick up can be very, very nice or cool, or give you some interaction of, for example, every time Amy goes up a particular track, or any opponent goes up a particular track, now I'm going to be getting gems or points or things like that. And so it adds those flavors to the game. The other thing is that the monsters, each monster has their own kind of unique ability, and that also kind of adds a new flavor to whatever's happening that round. Sometimes it's like you're going to get, again, points for if they send you to the underworld, or you're going to get all sorts of different things, or extra swords, or things like that. And then the regrouping, like that is such a cool, the fact that like usually the regrouping in any Euro game is like it's a missed turn. In here, it's become another opportunity for worker placement. Not only that, for like tableau or engine activation, which is so amazing.
And you can time that. So you're thinking about, do I put out all of my workers and then bring them all back in and activate these actions and additional resources? or do I just put 2 out and then quickly bring them back in to beat my opponents to get something else done in this game? And so I really like thinking about the timing element of that. The magic cards are an element that add in a little sprinkle of luck and surprise into this game. What I really enjoy about these style of games, you will know if you watch the channel that we like a game with low luck and a lot of kind of visibility or perfect information about what people are doing or trying to get done, and then
so you can plan accordingly.
And kind of adapt your strategy. The magic cards add that little element of surprise into the game, and usually the most interesting things are, a surprise number of points at the end of the game, which we'll come back to, or having something, having a spell that kind of makes you powerful in a fight, which someone might not realize, where they come in to fight you for an area so that they can build a dwelling there instead of you. And that does lead to some of those moments of, I forgot
I have this card up my sleeve, quite literally.
Exactly, and you didn't see that coming. And I think that's just enough luck and interest in this game, because you do have to work hard to get more magic cards. You've got to forego other actions, of course, and you've got to pay resources to get more of them. So it's not overpowered, and it just brings in a bit of randomness into the game in the nicest possible way. Another thing I want to talk about in this game is the opaqueness of who's in the lead in this game. It is possible to sit there and calculate everybody's score, but during the game, you don't really get a good sense of who's winning. And that's because at the end of the game, there is a bit of multiplication to be done, because your final score is going to be based heavily on where you've placed your dwellings, the cards in your tableau, and then to a huge extent, the multiplication amount based on where you're positioned on each of the elements that are part of that particular game. And so it can be quite interesting at the end of the game, where we go through the scoring and you just see the massive amount of points that someone gets, and you're just like, oh no, I should have done more of that. Or, why didn't I see that happening? And there's so much to get done and to think about in this game that sometimes you can just miss that someone is really focusing hard on a single element.
But also sometimes they might have magic cards that have those end game prophecies or end game winning or scoring conditions. And so, you really don't know if are they holding on to stuff that is going to be worthless or useless, or do they have a whole lot of hidden points there. And apparently it's about I think it's from the rule books, 60% of the points can come from just that end calculation bit. So I do like not feeling that devastation of going, oh, I'm never going to catch up, because you genuinely may not really realize where people are at.
And I feel like even though there are multiple ways to get to the same end of this game, the ordering is really up for grabs. The way that you choose to, whether you want to summon more people or go after more cards or whatever the case may be with ordering, you really ultimately do need to balance your strategy a little bit, because you can't ignore the multiplication factor. You can't ignore really building dwellings because they're worth so many points. And you probably shouldn't ignore getting adventure cards either, because I've done that before and they can add up to a lot of points as well. So it's being a little bit opportunistic with the treasures or the resources that you have and using those to your advantage. And that is just exactly what we love in a game. So no surprise, we both really do enjoy this game.
Yeah, and I also appreciate that if you do have combat and you do get sent to the underworld, it's not the end of the world. Really?
It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, because it's not as devastating. Sometimes it's just annoying, because it's like, oh, I really wanted my worker there so I could build a dwelling. But most of the time, the main inconvenience is when you're regrouping those workers, they don't get to take your tableau actions, because they're coming from the underworld. So I guess they're not really feeling up to doing tasks along the way.
Yeah, so this game is really clever. I think it tightens the screws in every place where you feel like you want to have a little bit of an advantage. There's some little rules around, going into, once you've retrieved your workers, going back into battle, that not being able to fight straight away means that you can't really, unless you have a warrior.
This is the war,
it means most times you can see a battle coming.
Yeah, it's rare to be blindsided by a battle.
Yeah, that's right. You're not just having someone pop up in your area and fight you. You can kind of see that coming, anticipate it, and maybe have a backup plan. And I really appreciate that's a tiny rule, but it's something that really makes a difference in the way that this game plays out and the feeling of it being more strategic rather than random or heavy on the battle side of things. So I really enjoyed this game. I think another selling point of this game is, if you can't see that we really enjoyed this game, the player count scalability has been done in a very elegant way.
Yeah.
So we've played this from 2, 3, and 4 players. We haven't played it at 5 players, but you get a sense for this game that no matter the player count, it plays out fairly similarly in that the hex pattern changes and the number of elements that are in each game increases. And so all you get for more players is a bigger play space with more different elements that you can focus on. And that makes for a really easy setup process. Once you're kind of across how to set up this map, it's very, very easy. And in terms of the game experience, often Maggie and I will review a game that's meant for 4 players and try it at 2 players, and it doesn't have the same kind of feel to it. I really enjoyed our 2-player games of this.
I felt like all of the main things about the game felt very similar. The only thing that was a big difference for me, and what actually makes it better for me at the higher player counts, is that when it's only 2 players, I can keep better track of where Amy's going, and usually that means I can keep better track of how devastating the loss is going to be for me. And so having other people in the game makes it
obscures that.
Well, it also gives it gives me a little bit of a break, because it means that there's a lot more things going on, and there's a little bit more movement and a lot of more things to kind of hide and not really know what's happening.
Yeah.
So I enjoy it. I personally enjoyed it at the higher player counts, at the 3 or 4 player counts.
I mean, I did as well, but I would say that if you're a household of 2 and 2 is your only option, this is a fantastic game.
Great 2-player game.
Fantastic game at 2 for such a big experience. I still felt the tension of, Maggie is going to steal that spot and I really need to get there before her. The monsters still add that same tension to a 2-player game. So I thought the scaling was really, really clever actually in this game, and I'd be happy to play it at any of those player counts. You also played it solo.
I did. So the solo mode, you're actually playing with the Ghost of Eldervale. So the Ghost of Eldervale introduces this little ghost wooden token meeple piece. And so what's going to happen is the ghost doesn't actually do anything. It follows you around. So you're going to, wherever, say for example, if I ended up going there, then the ghost is always going to go there. And a lot of it has its own mat, or its own player mat. And that's going to be dictating the types of units. So you do a roll of a dice to dictate what type of unit is going to be going onto a map. And then there's cards that are placed underneath those units that then would dictate, well, what's the action that unit is going to be doing and where it's going to be going. And usually it's in relation to where the ghost happens to be. And so that addition of the ghost is quite interesting, because it means that an AI that could have just been randomly throwing things into the game state is actually, because it's following you around, is actually interacting with you a lot throughout, annoyingly so. Even more so than, if I were playing with, if Amy and we decided that we're just going to be doing our own
more
things.
Annoying than Amy?
Yes, usually I find the automas less tricky or less brutal. Not so with this one. It's relentlessly chasing me around. But with that, one of the things that I'll say is I don't tend to enjoy solo modes where I have to facilitate an automa, and there's a fair bit of admin that you're doing with this one. It's not overwhelming, but it's enough that I found myself, it's not just I sort of always give the example of Mage, and I was like, you've got one card, one thing, and then that's it. You're just sort of playing the game and not having to worry about anything else. In here, you are having to do a roll of a die, decide, okay, well, which type of unit gets activated, and then where are they going to go, and what is it that they're going to do, and then so I found myself, as I was playing through it, I kind of I was sort of losing steam, because I sort of would get distracted, and I almost would feel like, that procrastination of like, oh, wait, what was I doing? Maybe I'll do something else. I completely forgot my train of thought of what I was going to be, what I was trying to achieve, because now I kind of have gone into facilitating the AI. So for me, it's not really a game that I would play solo. Having said that, if you don't mind the facilitation of an AI, yes, there's a little bit of admin. It's not the most complicated or convoluted AI. It's actually pretty pretty interesting in the way that it plays. In terms of the difficulty, that's interesting because there isn't really a grading of difficulty with it. The cards themselves, some of them are a bit more brutal in terms of what they do than others. So some of the suggestions, if you wanted to grade the difficulty, is like using, instead of having them all showing, you would kind of have them face down, and so you can't really plan ahead and go, oh, okay, well, these are the only places that the ghost could build dwellings, and so I could kind of block them. So that's the main thing. But I actually found that, yeah, it almost kind of depended on what combination of those cards. If a lot of those powerful ones came up at the start, sometimes it would get a bit of a lead. So it's inconsistent in its difficulty, but there's some non-official ways of trying to make it harder for yourself. Again, interesting solo implementation, not something that I myself would play just because of that overhead of facilitating the AI.
So as you can see, we really enjoyed Dwellings of Eldervale much more than our expectations.
Absolutely, yeah.
And one thing I really like about this game is its ability to bridge different gamers with different preferences. I found that when we were playing this, our kind of D&D loving players around the table who just enjoy the fantasy theme, their eyes lit up when they saw, the characters and this world that you're playing in. I should say the factions, they have a bit of asymmetry to them, but that only affects the powers of your workers, and so it's very minor and easy to pick up, but they all make thematic sense with the faction that you're playing as. And if you love that type of thing, then you'll probably really appreciate those little touches, those little thematic touches. And then through to the optimizer, the person who understands how to race through a Euro game and wants to kind of have a lot of constraints put on them and a really nice, tight, competitive game. It's really going to appeal to those gamers as well, and we are those gamers. So,
and for me, it's about that building, so that seeing that map grow, and then you're building that tableau. It gives me that sense of creativity and that sense of like I'm constructing something and I'm kind of progressing, which I love.
So what a wonderful game. This game will be staying in our collection. If you enjoyed this review, please hit like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game reviews soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.